Fleet Commander Vorth had served the Kethavari Empire for 60 cycles. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had watched species surrender their futures rather than face imperial wrath. He had never once questioned that the Empire would stand forever. So when his censor officer reported an unknown vessel at the edge of monitored space, Vorth felt only mild curiosity. Unknown vessels appeared from time to time. They were usually lost traders or primitive species making their first stumbling attempts at space travel. Either way, they quickly learned their place. "Show me," Vorth commanded. The main display flickered to life. The ship that appeared made no sense to his experienced eyes. Its hull was dark, almost black, with none of the elegant curves that marked imperial design. The proportions seemed wrong. It was compact where ships should be extended, thick where they should be narrow. Weapon ports dotted its surface in configurations that followed no doctrine he recognized. "Classification?" he asked. "Unknown, Commander." The censor officer's voice carried a note of confusion. "It matches nothing in our records. Hull composition unknown. Power signature unknown. Propulsion system unknown." Varath frowned. That was unusual. The Empire had encountered over 400 species. Their database contained every ship design in known space. Every species built according to certain universal principles, constrained by the same physics, the same materials, the same limitations. Origin point: it emerged from Sector 774. Empty space, Commander. No hyperspace lanes within 3 light years. That's impossible. Yes, Commander. Vorth studied the vessel for a long moment. It hung motionless against the stars, neither approaching nor retreating, waiting. "Open a channel. Standard identification protocol." The communication officer worked her console. Seconds passed. Then the display updated with an incoming transmission. Mathematical sequences first, the universal language of first contact, then something unexpected. Words in Imperial Common, crude but functional. "This is the United Nations ship Magellan, representing the human species of Earth. We come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic contact with your civilization." Varath almost laughed. Humans. He remembered the briefing from 18 cycles ago. A primitive species discovered on a violent little world at the edge of explored space. Classified as pre-emergence, meaning they were still centuries away from developing faster than light travel. They had been noted, cataloged, and forgotten. "Communications, check the species registry for humans." A pause. "Confirmed, Commander. Species cataloged 18 cycles ago. Homeworld designated as Class 7 Death World. Technological status at discovery was early atomic age. Projected FTL development in 100 to 200 cycles." "Yet here they are," Vorth murmured. He considered the possibilities. The humans must have acquired technology from somewhere. Stolen it, perhaps, or traded for it with another species. It happened occasionally. Lesser species sometimes got hold of equipment they couldn't possibly have built themselves. That made them either pirates or fools. Either way, they would learn respect for imperial authority. "Respond to their transmission, inform them they have entered imperial space and must submit to inspection under Article 7 of the expansion protocols. They will power down all systems and prepare to be boarded." The message was sent. The reply came quickly. "We respectfully request peaceful dialogue. We mean no intrusion and are happy to withdraw to neutral space for discussions. We simply wish to establish communication between our peoples." Varath's frown deepened. The words were polite, but the humans had not complied. They had not powered down. They had not submitted. "Inform them that this is not a negotiation. They will comply or face the consequences. The Kethavari Empire does not make requests twice." Another pause. Then the reply came, and this time Vorth detected something different in the tone. Not fear, not defiance, something harder to identify. "We understand your position, Commander. However, we cannot power down our systems or submit to boarding at this time. We remain committed to peaceful contact and ask that you relay our request for diplomatic engagement to your superiors." Around Vorth, his bridge crew exchanged glances. No one spoke to the Empire this way. No one refused a direct order. Subject species learned quickly that defiance meant death. Those that learn slowly simply cease to exist. Weapons officer, targeting solution on the alien vessel, warning shot across their bow. Yes, Commander. The Imperial warship's main batteries charged with a rising hum that Vorath found deeply satisfying. He had given the humans every chance. What followed was their own fault. Fire! The plasma burst streaked across space, a brilliant lance of destruction that could gut a battlecruiser. It was aimed to pass within 100 meters of the human ship, close enough to scorch their hull, close enough to demonstrate what came next if they continued their defiance. The shot hit nothing. Vorath blinked. The human ship was no longer where it had been. It now held position 2,000 kilometers to port, motionless once again, as if it had always been there. What happened? Commander! The sensor officer's voice had changed. The confusion was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. The alien vessel moved. No engine signature detected. No acceleration curve. It simply relocated. That's impossible, Vorath said again, but the words felt hollow now. Commander, the tactical officer spoke urgently. Power readings from the alien vessel are increasing, tenfold increase in the last 30 seconds. And, he paused, checking his readings twice, we're detecting weapon systems. They were armed before. We noted the weapon ports. No, Commander. We noted ports that we assumed were weapons. What we're detecting now is different. These signatures don't match anything in our records. The power output alone exceeds our entire fleet combined. Vorath stared at the dark ship floating serenely in space. It looked small compared to his cruiser. It looked primitive, with its blocky construction and graceless angles. But the numbers on his tactical display told a different story. A new transmission arrived. The same voice, the same calm tone, but with an edge now that cut through the static. Commander, we have demonstrated that your weapons cannot touch us. We ask again for peaceful dialogue. We have no wish for conflict, but we need you to understand that conflict will not benefit either of our peoples. Please consult with your superiors. We will wait. The transmission ended. Vorath stood frozen on his bridge. In 60 cycles of service, he had never encountered anything like this. A ship that moved without moving, weapons that dwarfed Imperial technology, a species that should have been building their first satellites now speaking to him as equals. No, not as equals. The humans were speaking to him the way he spoke to subject species, with patience, with careful words, with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the power and chose not to use it. Communications, Vorath said finally. Send a priority transmission to High Command, full sensor logs, all data on the alien vessel. He paused, forcing the next words out through pride that fought against the truth. Inform them we have a situation that requires immediate attention at the highest levels. His communications officer stared at him. In 60 cycles, Vorath had never called for help. He had never admitted that anything was beyond his ability to handle. Do it, he snapped. As the transmission was prepared, Vorath watched the human ship. It had not moved again. It simply waited, patient as stone, while the Empire tried to understand what it was facing. Vorath thought about the species registry, Death World, early atomic age, pre-emergence. The Empire had dismissed the humans as irrelevant. Just another primitive species to be conquered when the Empire eventually expanded in their direction. Not worth attention, not worth concern. He thought about how casually that assessment had been made. A single scout ship had visited their world, gathered basic data, and moved on. No one had considered that the humans might be watching back. No one had wondered what a species from a violent, deadly world might do when they learned they were not alone. No one had imagined that 18 cycles later, that same species would send a ship that made the Empire's finest weapons look like toys. What else had the Empire missed? The question haunted Vorath as he watched the human vessel and waited for High Command's response. Somewhere in the depths of space, something had changed. The Empire had ruled for 12,000 years. They had crushed every threat, absorbed every rival, eliminated every species that dared to stand against them. But now there was something new in the darkness, between stars. Something that moved without being seen. Something that had been watching, learning, preparing. And Vorith, for the first time in his long career, was afraid. The throne room of Keth Prime had stood for 8,000 years. Its walls were carved from the bones of mountains, polished until they gleamed like black mirrors. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, each one representing a conquered species, a broken rebellion, a world brought to heel. There were 412 banners. Some said more would come. They always did. Empress Cythera VII sat upon the eternal throne and listened to the reports from the border with growing impatience. Her advisors spoke in careful tones about the unknown vessel, the impossible readings, the strange species that should not have existed. She had ruled for 30 cycles. She had seen threats rise and fall. She had crushed uprisings, executed traitors, and expanded imperial borders by 11 systems. She had no patience for mystery or caution. "Enough," she said, and the throne room fell silent. "You speak of this vessel as though it were a dragon from old myths. It is one ship, one. We command fleets that number in the tens of thousands. Whatever technology these humans possess, it cannot change mathematics." Grand Admiral Thesic stepped forward. He was old, scarred, and had served 3 emperors before Cythera. "Majesty, the readings are concerning. If accurate, this single vessel possesses more firepower than our entire border fleet." "If accurate," Cythera repeated, "and if my throne were made of starfire, I could burn worlds with a thought. Sensor readings can be falsified. Power signatures can be masked or amplified. This is clearly deception." "To what end, Majesty?" "To make us hesitate, to buy time." Cythera leaned forward on her throne. These humans were catalogued as primitives. They have somehow acquired advanced technology. Perhaps they stole it. Perhaps they found ruins of some dead civilization. Either way, one ship does not make a threat. One ship makes a curiosity to be captured and studied. She gestured, and a holographic display activated. The galaxy spread before her, with Imperial territory marked in red. It covered nearly a quarter of the known galaxy. 400 systems, 12,000 years of conquest. "Look at what we have built," she said. "Look at what we are. We have broken species that ruled before our ancestors learned to walk. We have conquered empires that made these humans look like insects. And you come to me afraid of a single ship?" No one answered. The advisors looked at the floor. They knew better than to argue when the Empress spoke in this tone. "Send the third fleet," Cythera commanded. "Full strength. If the humans wish to negotiate, we will negotiate. But they will do so with 12,000 warships watching their every word. And if they prove troublesome, we will take their ship, extract their secrets, and add another banner to my walls." The orders went out. The third fleet began to mobilize. Far from Keth Prime, aboard the Magellan, Captain Elena Vasquez read the intelligence reports with a heavy heart. "They're not taking the diplomatic approach seriously," she said. Commander Park stood beside her in the captain's ready room. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly as the ship held position in empty space. "Did we expect them to?" "Hoped, maybe." Vasquez set down the tablet. 12,000 ships. They're bringing everything they have in this sector. We could leave, fold back to human space before they arrive. And then what? They know we exist now. They know we have technology they don't understand. An empire like this doesn't forget. They'll come looking for us eventually. Vasquez shook her head. "No, we opened this door. We have to walk through it." She pulled up another display. The map showed not just imperial space, but the vast regions beyond it. Humanity's domain was marked in blue. 217 colonies spread across 100 light years. A population of 9 billion. And all of it invisible to imperial sensors. 30 years, Vasquez said quietly. "We watched them for 30 years. And they never knew. They never looked." Vasquez remembered the first contact when humanity detected imperial signals leaking across the void. The excitement and the fear. The debates that raged for years about what to do. We could have hidden forever, stayed quiet, let them pass us by. But we didn't. Because hiding doesn't work forever. They're expanding. In another century, maybe 2, they would have reached us anyway. And by then, Vasquez didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The intelligence reports told the story clearly enough. 412 species conquered, 89 rendered extinct. The Empire didn't negotiate with species it considered inferior. It absorbed them or destroyed them. Those were the only options. So we made another option, Park said. We tried. Vasquez stood and moved to the viewport. We spent 30 years preparing for this moment, building ships they couldn't detect, developing weapons they couldn't understand, mapping their territory, their supply lines, their weaknesses. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. We hoped that when we finally made contact, they would see reason. They would recognize that we weren't prey. And instead, they're sending 12,000 ships to teach us our place. Yes. Park was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that mattered. What are our orders? Vasquez turned from the viewport. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something harder. She had commanded this ship for 10 years. She had trained for this possibility since the day she entered the academy. She had hoped, prayed, that it would never come. But it had come, and now she had to decide what humanity would be. We request a formal diplomatic meeting, she said. Neutral ground, no weapons, just talking. They won't agree. They will. They're curious about our technology. They'll want to learn our secrets before they conquer us. A thin smile crossed her face. They don't realize we want the same thing, a chance to talk, to show them what we really are. And if talking doesn't work, Vasquez reached into her uniform and removed a data chip. It was small, unremarkable, sealed with codes that only she could unlock. The sealed orders she had carried since leaving Earth. The contingency that no one wanted to use but everyone knew might be necessary. Then we show them the other thing we've spent 30 years preparing. She didn't say what that was. She didn't need to. Park had read the same contingency files. He knew what humanity had built in the shadows while the Empire wasn't watching. I'll send the diplomatic request, Park said. Do that. And Park? Vasquez met his eyes. Whatever happens in that meeting, whatever they say or threaten, we don't fire first. We don't attack first. We give them every chance to choose peace. Even if they won't take it? Especially then, because when this is over, however it ends, I want us to be able to look in the mirror. I want us to know that we tried. Park nodded and left to send the transmission. Vasquez remained at the viewport watching the stars. Somewhere out there, 12,000 Imperial warships were preparing for conquest. Their commanders were certain of victory. Their crews were confident in the power they wielded. They had broken 400 species. They had no reason to believe humans would be different, but they had made a mistake. The same mistake they had made for 12,000 years. They had looked at the galaxy and seen only two kinds of species, predators and prey, masters and slaves, conquerors and conquered. They had never imagined a third option. They had never considered that somewhere in the vast darkness, a species might be watching them, learning from their cruelty, studying their weaknesses, building something new, something different, something that didn't want to conquer or submit, something that just wanted to survive. The diplomatic response came 6 hours later. The Empire agreed to a meeting, neutral ground, a barren moon in an uninhabited system. Vasquez read the message and felt hope and dread in equal measure. The talking would come first. Then whatever came after, humanity would face it together. She had 30 years of preparation behind her. She hoped it would be enough. The moon had no name. It was a dead rock orbiting a dying star, with no atmosphere, no water, no life. The Empire had cataloged it centuries ago and forgotten it immediately. There was nothing there worth taking. Now it served as neutral ground for a meeting that would change the galaxy. Captain Vasquez descended from the Magellan's shuttle with 4 members of her crew. They wore standard environmental suits, nothing more. No weapons visible, no armor, just 5 humans walking across gray dust toward a future none of them could predict. The Imperial delegation waited near their own shuttle. Lord Cassith stood at the center, his ceremonial robes looking out of place in the barren landscape. He was Kethvari nobility, born to rule, raised to believe his species sat at the pinnacle of creation. Behind him stood a dozen guards in full combat armor, their weapons openly displayed. Vasquez noted the difference in their approaches. She had come to talk. Cassith had come to intimidate. "You are the human commander," Cassith said when they were close enough to speak. His translator rendered his words in flat, mechanical tones. I am Lord Cassith, voice of the Empress, bearer of imperial will. I am here to accept your surrender. Vasquez stopped a few meters away. I'm Captain Elena Vasquez, representing the United Nations of Earth. I'm here to discuss peace between our peoples. There is no discussion necessary. Cassith's posture radiated contempt. The terms are simple. You will share all technological secrets with the Empire. You will accept imperial governance over your worlds. You will provide soldiers for our legions. In exchange, you will be granted protected species status. You will serve, but you will survive. Vasquez had expected this. The intelligence reports had prepared her for imperial arrogance. But hearing it spoken so casually, as though the enslavement of humanity was simply a business transaction, still sent cold anger through her veins. She kept her voice calm. I'm afraid those terms are unacceptable. We propose instead a mutual non-aggression treaty, free trade between our territories, cultural exchange, perhaps in time, alliance. Cassith stared at her. For a long moment he seemed unable to process what she had said. Then he laughed. You misunderstand your position, human. You do not negotiate with the Empire. You obey or you die. These are the only options that have ever existed. How many species have you given those options to? All of them, Cassith smiled. 412 species have accepted imperial rule. They serve us now, as you will serve us. And the ones who refused? 89 species chose extinction over submission. He said it without shame, without regret. It was simply a fact. Like the color of the sky or the weight of gravity. Their worlds are graves now, monuments to foolishness. Vasquez felt something shift inside her. Not anger anymore. Something colder. Something that had been building for 30 years, since humanity first learned what lurked among the stars. May I show you something, Lord Cassith? He frowned at the request. What? Vasquez raised her hand, and one of her crew activated a portable holographic projector. Light flickered in the airless void, forming shapes, patterns, images. A star map appeared. Not the Empire's map, but something larger. It showed imperial space clearly enough, the familiar territory marked in red. But beyond the red, in regions the Empire considered empty and unexplored, there was blue. So much blue. This is human space, Vasquez said. 217 colony worlds, 9 billion people, spread across 100 light-years of territory that your empire never knew existed. Casseth's expression flickered, confusion first, then denial. Impossible. We monitor all space within range of our sensors. We would have detected colonization on this scale. Your sensors use hyperspace resonance technology. They detect ships traveling through hyperspace lanes. Vasquez watched his face as understanding began to dawn. We don't use hyperspace. We developed fold space technology. Different principles, different signatures, invisible to your detection systems. This is a trick, a fabrication. It's not. Vasquez gestured, and the map zoomed in on Imperial territory itself. Lines appeared, crisscrossing through systems the Empire considered secure. Supply routes, communication networks, military installations, all of it mapped with perfect accuracy. We've been watching you for 30 years, Vasquez said. We detected your signals. We studied your technology. We watched how you treated the species you conquered, and we decided we didn't want to be next. She let the words hang in the silence between them. So we prepared. We built ships you couldn't see. We developed weapons you couldn't understand. We mapped your entire empire without ever making contact. She met Cassith's eyes. We hoped you would be different than we feared. We hoped that when we finally revealed ourselves, you would see us as partners, not prey. And instead, Cassith's voice had lost some of its certainty. Instead, you sent 12,000 warships to conquer us. Instead, you offered us slavery or death. Vasquez shook her head slowly. We didn't want this, Lord Cassith. We wanted peace. We still want peace. But we need you to understand something very clearly. She stepped closer. The Imperial guards raised their weapons. She ignored them. We are not one of your conquered species. We are not primitives who stumbled into technology we don't understand. We have spent 3 decades preparing for the possibility that you would try to destroy us." Her voice hardened. "Every supply line you depend on, we can cut. Every shipyard you possess, we can reach. Every world you call home, we can find." "You threaten the Empire?" Cassith's outrage was almost theatrical. "You dare?" "I don't threaten. I explain." Vasquez stepped back, her posture deliberately non-aggressive. "Go back to your Empress. Tell her what you've learned. Tell her that humanity wants peace. Tell her that we have no interest in conquest or revenge. But tell her also that if she sends her fleets against us, they will not return. And if she doubts my words, she can ask the commander of your border fleet. He has already seen what one human ship can do." Cassith stood rigid, his world crumbling around him. Everything he believed, everything the Empire had built its identity upon, was being challenged by this small, soft-looking creature from a death world at the edge of known space. "This changes nothing," he said finally. "The Empire does not yield to threats. We will crush you as we have crushed all others. Then you will lose." The words were simple, spoken without boasting or anger. They were just a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had done the math and knew the answer. Cassith turned and walked back to his shuttle. His guards followed, weapons still raised, as though they expected the humans to attack at any moment. They didn't. They simply stood and watched the Imperial delegation leave. When the shuttle had lifted off and vanished into the black sky, Commander Park spoke. "They're not going to back down." "No." Vasquez watched the stars, knowing that somewhere beyond them, 12,000 warships were preparing to prove her wrong. They've ruled too long, conquered too many. They can't imagine losing. "So what now?" Vasquez turned back toward their own shuttle. Her face was tired but determined. She had done everything she could to prevent what was coming. She had offered peace, explained the consequences, given the Empire every reason to choose a different path. They had refused. "Now we show them," she said quietly. "Now we show them what humanity can do when we have no choice but to fight." She climbed into the shuttle and began preparing the message that would change everything. The sealed orders would be opened. The contingency would be activated. And the galaxy would learn that the species they had dismissed as primitives had been watching, waiting, preparing. For 30 years, humanity had hoped for the best. Now they were ready for the worst. Empress Sithara read Cassith's report in silence. Her advisors waited, watching her face for any sign of what she was thinking. They saw nothing. The Empress had learned long ago to hide her thoughts behind a mask of imperial composure. When she finished, she set the tablet down and looked at the assembled council. "Human deception," she said. "Nothing more." Grand Admiral Thesic shifted uncomfortably. "Majesty, the sensor data from the border fleet is difficult to explain. The human vessel demonstrated capabilities that—" "One ship," Sithara cut him off. "They have shown us one ship. Perhaps it is powerful. Perhaps they have achieved some technological breakthrough we do not yet understand. But they speak of 200 worlds, 9 billion people, 30 years of preparation? No." She shook her head. "No species hides that effectively. No species builds an empire in secret. This is psychological warfare. They want us to hesitate. And if we're wrong?" The question came from an unexpected source. Archivist Maleth, ancient and stooped, rarely spoke in council meetings. He kept the records, nothing more. But now he looked at the Empress with eyes that had seen 8 rulers come and go. "If we're wrong, Majesty," he continued, "we face an enemy that knows our every weakness and has had 30 years to exploit them." Sithara stared at him. The throne room was silent. "We are not wrong," she said finally. "We cannot be wrong. The Empire has stood for 12,000 years. We have broken every threat that has ever risen against us. We will break this one too." She turned to Thesic. "Send the Third Fleet. Full engagement. I want that human ship captured and its crew brought to me alive. I will learn their secrets one way or another." The orders were sent. The Third Fleet advanced. Admiral Korath commanded from the Bridge of the Eternal Vengeance, the flagship of the Imperial Armada. 12,000 warships spread around him in perfect formation. their engines burning bright against the darkness. It was the largest force deployed in living memory, enough firepower to crack worlds, enough ships to darken the skies of 100 planets. They found the human ship exactly where it had been reported, a single vessel, dark and silent against the stars. "Target the alien ship," Korath commanded. "All batteries. Fire on my order." His tactical officer complied, and 12,000 targeting systems locked onto the Magellan, enough weapons to vaporize a small moon. Then the sensors went mad. "Admiral!" The sensor officer's voice cracked with disbelief. "New contacts! Multiple contacts!" Ships began appearing, not from hyperspace, with the characteristic flash and rumble that all Imperial crews knew. They simply appeared, folding into existence from nowhere. 10 ships, then 50, then 200, then 2,000. They surrounded the Imperial fleet in a sphere of dark hulls and unknown weapons. Each ship was smaller than an Imperial cruiser, but there were so many, and their power readings, their weapon signatures, the impossible technology that let them appear from nothing. "All ships defensive formation," Korath barked. "Weapons free! Engage at will!" The battle began. Imperial plasma cannons fired, brilliant lances of energy streaking toward the human vessels. But the human ships moved like nothing Korath had ever seen. They didn't dodge. They didn't retreat. They simply weren't where the weapon struck. One moment a ship was in targeting solution, the next it was somewhere else entirely. No acceleration, no engine burn. Just movement that defied physics. Human weapons answered. Beams of something that looked like captured starlight cut through space with surgical precision. They didn't hit hulls. They hit systems. A cruiser's engines died, leaving it drifting helplessly. A battleship's weapons went dark, its targeting arrays burned out in a fraction of a second. A carrier's shields collapsed, but its hull remained intact. Korath watched his fleet being taken apart. "They're not killing us," he realized aloud. "They're disabling us." Ship after ship went dark. Thousands of Imperial vessels, crewed by millions of soldiers, reduced to floating hulks in minutes. But the life support systems kept running. The hulls remained intact. The crews remained alive. The humans had the firepower to destroy the entire fleet. Instead, they were methodically neutralizing it without a single kill. "Admiral, we've lost 60% of our combat capability. Continue firing." But it was pointless. The human ships moved too fast, struck too precisely, operated according to principles that Imperial technology couldn't counter. Every shot missed. Every defensive measure failed. A Kethvari gunner named Varel watched his targeting display with growing horror. He had served 15 cycles. He had fought in a dozen campaigns. He had never missed a target. Now he couldn't hit anything. His plasma batteries fired again and again, filling space with destruction that touched nothing. The human ships flickered and danced, always one step ahead, always just beyond reach. It was like fighting ghosts. Then a beam struck his ship. Not the magazine, not the reactor, not any vital system, just the weapon arrays. His guns went dead. The targeting display went dark, and Varel was still alive. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Imperial crews prepared for death and found survival instead. Their ships were crippled, helpless, but they themselves were unharmed. The humans had every opportunity for slaughter. They had every justification for revenge after millennia of Imperial conquest. They chose mercy instead. On board a conscript transport, a soldier named Thresh watched the battle through external cameras. She wasn't Kethvari. Her species had been conquered 3 generations ago, pressed into Imperial service as cannon fodder. She had expected to die in this battle, sacrificed for an empire that had stolen her people's freedom. Instead, she watched that empire lose. The Imperial fleet was broken, 90% of ships disabled. The humans surrounded them now, their vessels holding position in a perfect sphere of quiet victory. A transmission came through on all channels. "This is Captain Vasquez of the United Nations ship Magellan, speaking to the surviving crews of the Imperial fleet. Your ships have been disabled, but your lives have been spared. We have no interest in your deaths. We have no desire for revenge." Thresh listened, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Your admiral refused to surrender, So we made the choice unnecessary. You are not prisoners. You are not hostages. As soon as your ships are capable of travel, you will be free to return to Imperial space." Around Thresh, her fellow conscripts exchanged uncertain glances. Free? They had never been free. They didn't know what the word meant anymore. "But before you go, we want you to carry a message back to your Empress. Tell her that this battle could have been a massacre. Tell her that we chose to spare your lives when we could have taken them. And tell her that we are still willing to talk peace." The transmission ended. On the Eternal Vengeance, Admiral Korath stood amid the wreckage of his command. Every system was dark except life support and internal communications. His mighty flagship was a coffin now, drifting in space with its weapons cold and its engines dead. Human Marines boarded an hour later. Korath expected execution. What he found was a young officer who saluted him with what seemed like genuine respect. "Admiral Korath, I'm Commander Williams. I'm here to escort you to meet with Captain Vasquez. To negotiate my surrender? To talk." Williams smiled slightly. "Just to talk." Korath was led through corridors of his own ship, past crews that watched with a mixture of shame and relief. He had never lost a battle before. He had never expected to survive losing one. Vasquez met him in a conference room that had once been his private study. She looked tired, he thought. Not triumphant, not gloating, just tired. "Admiral," she said, "please sit down. You have won. Speak your terms." "I don't have terms." Vasquez gestured at the viewport, where the disabled fleet drifted in darkness. "You see what we could have done. Every one of those ships could have been destroyed. Every crew could have been killed. We had the power to annihilate your fleet and leave no survivors. Yet you didn't." "No." Vasquez leaned forward. "Because we're not trying to conquer you. We're not trying to replace your empire with our own. We just want to live in peace. We want the same thing every species wants. A future for our children, a place in the galaxy, a chance to grow and learn and become something better than we are." Korath studied her. He had faced many enemies in his career. He had seen hatred, fear, desperation, madness. He had never seen this. "Your Empress will not surrender," he said finally. "She cannot. The Empire has never surrendered. To do so would be to admit that everything we have built for 12,000 years was wrong." "I know," Vasquez nodded, "but I'm not asking for surrender. I'm asking for a chance. Go back to Keth Prime. Tell your Empress what you've seen. Tell her that we don't want to destroy the Empire. We don't want to kill its people or burn its worlds. We just want it to change." "Change into what?" "Something better than what it is now." Korath looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the battle began. "Why spare us? Why show mercy to an enemy that would have shown you none?" Vasquez was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "Because we looked at your empire and saw what we could become. A species that conquered and enslaved, that destroyed anything it couldn't control. We spent 30 years preparing to fight you." She met his eyes. "But we also spent those years asking ourselves what we wanted to be. What kind of species? What kind of civilization?" She stood and walked to the viewport. "We decided we wanted to be the kind that doesn't need to destroy to survive. The kind that can win without becoming the monster we defeated." She turned back to him. "Today was a test, not of your fleet, of us. We passed." Korath stood slowly. His pride was shattered. His career was over. Everything he had believed about the Empire's invincibility had been proven wrong. But somewhere beneath the shame and the fear, something else stirred. Something that felt almost like hope. "I will carry your message," he said. Vasquez nodded. "Thank you, Admiral. Safe journey home." The Imperial fleet limped back to Keth Prime 3 weeks later. They carried no cargo, no prisoners, no tales of victory. They carried only a message, and the galaxy would never be the same. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a slow collapse of everything the Empire had built. Human fleets appeared at will throughout Imperial space. They followed the same pattern every time. Disable, capture, release. No worlds were burned, no populations were slaughtered. When human forces took orbital stations or planetary installations, they offered the subject species a simple choice: remain under imperial authority or accept human protection. Most chose protection. After 12,000 years of conquest, the Empire had made many enemies. They had just never had anywhere else to go. Now they did. On world after world, species that had served as slaves rose up. Not in bloody revolution, but in quiet departure. They walked away from imperial cities, imperial factories, imperial armies. They walked toward the human ships that waited in orbit, offering passage to freedom. The Empire tried to stop them. They sent fleets that were disabled. They sent armies that were surrounded and offered surrender. They made threats that meant nothing against an enemy they could not touch. Within months, the 412 subject species had become 412 free peoples. The Empire, which had ruled a quarter of the galaxy, found itself shrinking to its original borders. Just the Kethvari, just their homeworld and their colony systems. Nothing more. Empress Sithara faced a choice she had never imagined possible. She sat alone in her throne room, surrounded by empty seats where her advisors had once gathered. Most had fled. Some had been executed for failures that were not their fault. A few remained, loyal to the end, but they had no counsel to offer. There was nothing left to advise. The humans had offered terms. Not surrender, they insisted. Partnership. The Kethvari would release their remaining subject peoples. War criminals would face justice. The Empire would become simply a nation, one among many, no longer masters of anything but themselves. In exchange, they could keep their worlds. They could keep their culture, their traditions, their identity. And in time, if they chose reform over revenge, they would be welcomed as partners in what humanity was building. Not a new empire, something different, an alliance, a federation, a gathering of species that worked together instead of dominating each other. Sethera looked at the banners hanging from her ceiling. 412 species, 412 conquests, 12,000 years of blood and glory. All of it meaningless now. She could refuse. She could fight to the last Kethvari, burn her own worlds rather than accept defeat, die on her throne surrounded by the corpses of her people. It was what her ancestors would have done. It was what her pride demanded. But she looked at those banners and thought about what they really represented. Not victories, not glory, just suffering. Generation after generation of other species living and dying under Kethvari rule. Their potential crushed, their futures stolen. She had never thought of it that way before. She had been raised to see conquest as natural, inevitable, the way the galaxy worked. The strong ruled, the weak served. That was simply how things were. The humans had shown her another way. They had won. They had absolute power over the Empire. They could have taken everything, killed everyone, erased the Kethvari from history. Instead, they offered mercy. They offered a future. Sithera accepted their terms. 30 years passed. The galaxy that emerged from the collapse of the Empire was unrecognizable. The Alliance, as it came to be called, grew to include over 500 species. Humans served as mediators, peacekeepers, and occasionally reluctant leaders. They had never wanted to rule. They still didn't. But someone had to help the newly freed peoples find their way. And humanity had the ships, the technology, and most importantly, the trust. It wasn't easy. Species that had been enslaved for generations struggled to build new societies. Old hatreds ran deep. Former masters and former slaves had to learn to live as equals. There were conflicts, setbacks, moments when it seemed the whole experiment might collapse into chaos. But it didn't collapse. Slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to heal. The Kethvari found their place in this new order. It was a humble place compared to what they had known. Their empire was gone. Their glory was a memory. But they were alive, free to shape their own future, instead of being erased from existence. Some of them embraced the change. A new generation grew up without the weight of conquest on their shoulders, without the belief that they were born to rule. They looked at the galaxy with different eyes and saw possibilities their ancestors could never have imagined. Others struggled. The old ways died hard. Pride that had sustained a species for millennia could not vanish overnight. But even the most stubborn traditionalists had to admit that the alternative, extinction, would have been worse. On the anniversary of the war's end, a memorial was dedicated on Keth Prime, not a monument to imperial glory, but a remembrance of the species the Empire had destroyed. 89 names carved in stone, their stories told for the first time in thousands of years. Representatives from across the Alliance attended. Former conquerors stood beside former slaves. Species that had been enemies learned each other's names. Among the crowd stood an elderly human woman. Her hair was white now, her face lined with age, but her eyes were still sharp. Elena Vasquez had retired from command 15 years ago. She had led the Alliance Council for a decade after that. Now she simply watched, a witness to the world she had helped create. A young Kethvari approached her. She was perhaps 20 cycles old, born long after the war had ended. She wore the simple clothes of a student, not the elaborate robes of old nobility. "You're Captain Vasquez," the young Kethvari said. "I've read about you." Vasquez smiled. "Just Elena now. I haven't been a captain in a long time." "I wanted to ask you something." The young woman hesitated. "Do you ever regret it? Showing mercy, I mean. My people caused so much suffering. We conquered your neighbors. We would have conquered you. If you had destroyed us instead, no one would have blamed you." Vasquez was quiet for a moment. She looked at the memorial, at the names of extinct species, at the gathered representatives of hundreds of worlds. "When I was young," she said finally, "I studied human history. We weren't always kind to each other. We built empires of our own. We conquered and enslaved and destroyed, just like your people did. And eventually those empires fell. They always do." She turned to face the young Kethvari. "We learned over thousands of years that the only victories worth having are the ones that leave something worth living in afterward. Destruction is easy. Anyone can burn a world. The hard part is building something that lasts, something that makes life better instead of worse. But we didn't deserve mercy. We deserved punishment." "Maybe," Vasquez nodded slowly. "But mercy isn't about what people deserve. It's about who we want to be. When we had the power to destroy your empire, we had to decide what that power meant, what it was for. We decided it was for building, not breaking." The young woman considered this. "And do you think it worked? Do you think we're better now?" Vasquez looked around at the memorial, at the species gathered together, at the former enemies standing as equals. "I think we're trying," she said. "All of us. That's all anyone can do." She left the young Kethvari to her thoughts and walked through the crowd. Old friends and former colleagues greeted her. Species she had negotiated with, fought alongside, helped rebuild. Each one represented a choice, a moment when destruction would have been easier, but creation had been chosen instead. Later that day, she watched a shuttle launch from the spaceport, a joint exploration mission, crewed by humans and Kethvari together, heading beyond the edges of known space. The galaxy was larger than any empire, larger than any war. There were wonders out there waiting to be discovered, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the species of the galaxy were discovering them together. Vasquez watched until the shuttle vanished among the stars. Then she turned and walked back into the crowd, into the world that mercy had made possible. The galaxy still had problems. It always would. There would be conflicts, setbacks, moments of doubt and fear. The work of building something better never ended. But it was good work, honest work, the kind of work that left the galaxy a little brighter than before. And that, Elena Vasquez thought, was enough. It had to be enough. It was.